Good morning. How's everyone this morning? Okay, so here's the deal. Y'all have to be engaged with me this morning because I've been standing over there in that closet for 3 months, all by myself in front of a camera trying to be all energetic for you. You got to give me something this morning, all right? Everybody doing all right? Okay. All right, so let me tell you, there has a lot of stuff happened since last time I saw y'all. I don't know if y'all knew this or not. Anybody been watching what's going on in the world? I mean, has it not? A lot of crazy stuff has been going on. Well, I started putting this into perspective, and I was thinking about this. First of all, we have the virus. How many of you guys were here when we had our very last worship service last time? I know Michael and you guys were. Most powerful worship service I think we've ever had at our church, if you guys remember that. It's amazing. And I think maybe that was almost like a premonition of us like weeping because we weren't going to be together, you know, for a little while. And so what we did is they asked us to do this, the virus, with everything that was going on, to shut churches down. And of course, we were deemed non-essential. So here's what happened is the church in America closes down for 3 months. And I realized we are not better off than we were when we did this. We're a whole lot worse than we did. So my thought is like, I think it's the worst thing that we've ever done, is like we stopped as a church in America worshiping God together as His people. And we are definitely worse off now than we were 3 months ago when we started this, and it makes me sad. Well, I started thinking this morning, well, what would God have to say? What does the Bible have to say to this morning? How can we get some encouragement? How can we find a place in Scripture that looks similar to where we're living right now in our world in a lot of different ways? And so what I want you to do is open up your Bibles to the book of Genesis, chapter 37, and we're going to look at the story of Joseph. I think a lot of you guys already know the story of Joseph, so maybe this will be a little review, but maybe I can point out some stuff, remind us of God's power and His glory. Here's the story of Joseph, all right? He is a teenage boy. He's got a bunch of brothers, and his dad loves him greatly. And you would think that that would be the recipe for a great story, but it's actually a recipe for a terrible story. What happens is that his dad loves him so much more than the other brothers, that he makes him this coat. You've heard, I think Disney made a movie about it too. He's got this coat of many colors, and his brothers are so jealous about this coat that his dad's showing more love to him than he did to them. And then Joseph has this dream, and he dreams, in his dream, the interpretation of his dream is that at some point in the future, his brothers and his dad are both going to bow down in front of him. And he tells them this, hey, I had this dream, and here's what happened, here's what the dream, and they're like, you think that one day we're going to bow down in front of you? So the brothers now, they're really ticked. He's got this coat that I wish I had. Daddy loves him more than me, and now he thinks we're going to bow down in front of him. Who does he think he is? Well, here's what happens. Genesis 37 verses 8 says this, his brothers hated him for these dreams. And verse 11 says, and they were jealous. You can understand, if you have brothers and sisters, a little bit of this, but let me say this, that hatred and jealousy go together, usually. And we see a lot of that right now. I'm going to make a lot of references here to our current world that we live. Hatred and jealousy go together. Because here's the thing, it's a natural response. It is. That's the way human beings just naturally respond to things. That's the human condition. That's the problem. And what Jesus does, he comes and he shows us an example of how to respond to things in unnatural ways, actually supernatural ways. But the natural person, this is the way they respond, with hate and jealousy. This is the natural response. Humility is not a natural response. Think about little children. You ever been to a daycare and looked around at all the humility that's running around in the room? No. You know, we don't have to teach our kids. You ever seen a parent look at the kid and say, hey, Jimmy, next time you get the ball, keep it for a little while. Don't give it away. You don't have to tell them that. We're born as human beings, and we have all of these things. It's the natural response. Hate, jealousy. Considering others better than yourself, that's not natural. Laying your life down for your friend is not natural. Loving your enemies is not. Caring for people who have hurt you, forgiving people who have hurt you. None of these things are natural responses. They're supernatural responses. And that's why we need Jesus to transform us. And you'll hear people say, let me tell you what's wrong with the world right now. They just need Jesus. Hear people say that. Well, we don't define what that means. That is absolutely true, but the definition of that is we need Jesus to transform us, make us into something that's unnatural, supernatural, do something inside of us that takes away the hatred and the jealousy, brings about humility and service. All these unnatural attributes that I'm talking about that Jesus gives, they only come to us through a worldview where we all believe with all of our heart and everything inside of us that Jesus is the greatest gift the world has ever seen. And that changes us, it transforms us. And following him means doing the unnatural things. And what happens is when we follow him and when we do those unnatural things, it brings about the blessings of God. It brings about his reward on our life. And we're going to see what that actually is and what that means. Okay, so here's what the brothers do next. They hate him, they're jealous, and they see him coming one day. And here's what it says in verse 19 to 20. And they said to one another, this is all of them collectively talking, here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. Here comes our brother. Let's kill him, then let's lie about it, because one sin leads to the next, the cover-up, and then let's see what he thinks at that point. Kill our brother. I mean, can you imagine? I don't have any brothers and sisters, okay? But some of you guys do, most of you probably do. Have you ever actually got with your other brothers and sisters and said, let's kill her? I mean, this is bad, really serious stuff. Well, one of them, I think it was Reuben, he tries to save him and said, no, let's don't kill him. Let's just throw him in the pit. Let's just do the pit thing, but let's don't do the killing thing. So they do that. Well, while they're doing that and still trying to figure out what to do with him, they see this caravan coming. Not a Dodge Caravan, just by the way. It's actual real caravan is coming. And they're heading to Egypt, and so they say, here's what we should do. We should sell him to the caravan. We'll make some money. He'll be gone. It's kind of like killing him. We'll tell Dad. We'll do a cover-up, all that kind of stuff. It still works, but we can make some money on him. Let's just sell him into slavery. That's even worse than killing him. We'll have him suffer until they kill him. So they send him into slavery, they sell him, and this decision to sell Joseph means that it's going to be 22 years before they ever see him again. They don't know that, but that's what's going to happen. 22 years. So they go back to Jacob, his dad, and they say, hey, is this his coat? They tore it up. I can imagine they probably had a big time tearing his coat up because they hated that coat. Then they took an animal and killed it and sprinkled the blood on it and all that stuff and said, look, an animal killed Joseph. And their dad wept for days and weeks on end, and he never really recovered until he saw Joseph later. Terrible thing they did to him. And that's what they did. So now Joseph is on his way to Egypt as a slave. Well, when he gets there, what happens is that he gets sold to this guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar is the captain of the guard. He's got some status in the community and all that kind of stuff. And Joseph becomes his slave. He's the master, Joseph is the slave. But here's the deal about Joseph. He is steadfast in his faithfulness to God. Remember I talked about this unnatural and the natural? He does not respond in natural ways. He doesn't respond like most people would being put in slavery. He doesn't do that. He is so steadfast in his faithfulness to God and is responding to God in such unnatural ways. And then what happens is that God blesses him. He does. Here's what it says. Chapter 39 of Genesis, verses 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. Let me say this too. There is nothing better in the world that can be said about a human being than this. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Kenneth. The Lord was with Michael. The Lord was with Sue Ann. The Lord was with Roger. The Lord was with Pat. That's what we want. And that's the goal. The greatest thing that could ever happen to a human being is hearing those words, the Lord was with. Put your name in that place. And that's what it says about Joseph. And you're thinking, man, but he's been sold by his brothers. He's in slavery. He's a servant. And the Lord is with him. Unbelievable. It says the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. He's got so much of God all around him that the Potiphar is benefiting off of this just because of Joseph. And see, when Joseph is in Potiphar's house, Potiphar is enjoying the blessings of God through Joseph. And then later, as we see, Joseph's going to be taken to prison. And the blessing of God is going to go with Joseph into the prison, as you're going to see. And I think that the day that Joseph leaves Potiphar's house because of what's getting ready to happen, that the blessing of God also left Potiphar's house. Because here's the thing, God's blessings follow God's people. Because he is a personal God and he loves us. And he goes with us. Here's what Romans 8 says. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And that's the Joseph right here. Who can be against him if God is with him? And see, it might seem for a short time, maybe for a short while, that they're coming against us and we can't win, but it's not going to be for long. So here's what happens next is Potiphar's wife, she sees Joseph, and she thinks, man, he's a pretty good-looking kid. And she decides that she wants to seduce him and have Joseph come into her bed with her. Well, he's a slave. I'm Potiphar's wife. I do what I want to do. And so she tries to do this. Well, Joseph, again, so steadfast in his faithfulness to God to say, I'm not going to do this to Potiphar. I'm not going to do this to my God. And he refuses her. Now, let me just tell you, a few of us in this room know what it's like to have women mad at us. So she gets really upset, which you can understand in her position, and she throws him in jail. Off to jail he goes. She tells a lie. She makes up something that's not true about him, tells Potiphar, and then off to prison Joseph goes. And here's what it says about him when he gets in prison. Verses 20, chapter 39. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. Man, I've always just kind of passed by that. That's really important right there, what's getting ready to happen in just a few minutes. He is in the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph. That's a huge, big B-U-T there, okay? But the Lord was with him. That's enormous in this context. He was with Joseph, and he showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. And whatever was done there, he's the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. And don't miss these words that it keeps saying over and over and over in case you missed it. It was who that blessed Joseph? The Lord. Every single blessing in his life was from the Lord. It was the Lord who made him succeed. It was because God's blessing on his life that other people succeeded. So my question is, Joseph understands this. He understands that God is blessing him. Do you? Do you know that it's God's blessing on you? That every good thing that you have, whatever's going on in your life, you trust the Lord. It's him doing it. It's not you. It's not because you're really good looking. It's not because you are super educated, you're successful. He needs to do that to you. Whatever he gives us, it's just out of his love and mercy to us. And if there's anything that we have going on that we're succeeding at, it's God who did it. And Joseph recognizes it. He sees it because here's the thing. Faith in God leads to God's rewards. And that's what Joseph is experiencing. He has tremendous faith in God, and God is rewarding him. Joseph has an unwavering faith in God. Look what Hebrews 11:6 says about this. And without faith, it's impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. God is with Joseph because he understands and gets this. It's God who is taking care of me. It's God's reward on my life. It's him who's with me. But he's in prison. What kind of reward is that? Well, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Look at this. There's these two guys that end up in prison, a cupbearer and a baker to the king. And while they're down there, Joseph gets to know them, and they have this dream. Well, Joseph, he knows something about dreams, right? He's done this before. And so he tells them what's going to happen. And it happens exactly like he tells them. And he says to them, and they say, hey, thanks for interpreting our dreams. And he says, hey, on your way out, just remember me when you get out to the king. Like, you're going to be out to the king and stuff. I'm here. I'm sure they knew his story. I shouldn't be here. Like, help me out. I really don't like it down here. Help me get out of prison. And they said, yes, sounds great. And they forget about him. And 2 more years pass, and he's left in prison. Because that's what you get, Joseph, for being righteous. Have you ever got the wrong thing for doing the right thing? Yeah. Join the biblical club. That's the way it happens. But God is not done with his faithfulness and his reward and his blessings toward Joseph, because here's what happens next. Pharaoh has a dream. And he dreams, and he doesn't understand it, and he asks all the magicians and the sorcerers and everybody, and he tells them to interpret the dream for him, but nobody can. And they don't get serious about it, I think, until he probably says, hey, I'm going to kill all y'all unless somebody tells me what's up. And then all at once, the cupbearer, his memory comes back to him. Oh, there's this guy in prison. What was his name? Joe. Let me go find him. He goes, gets Joseph, brings him in, and they clean him all up and shave him and comb his hair and put him in nice clothes. He's going to be before the king, and he comes in. I just always thought about what Joseph, what he was thinking in this moment, everything that happened to him, sold into slavery, Potiphar's house, been in prison, sees God's blessing on his life, and here he's getting to walk into the Pharaoh. He's got to think, man, God, what are you doing? What is getting ready to happen? And so what happens is he comes in and he listens to Pharaoh's dream, and he interprets it for him, and he says this: you're going to have 7 years of a whole lot of stuff, and you're going to have 7 years of nothing. It's going to be a lot, and then there's going to be a famine. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of want. And if you want to survive it, here's the go. You got to do it, and he explains it all to him right there in Pharaoh. This guy just came out of prison 30 minutes ago, and he's telling the Pharaoh all this. Well, because God's hand's on him, the Pharaoh looks at him and says, I like this guy. He seems to be the smartest guy I've ever seen. And right there on the spot, he says, you're going to be the vice president. And he promotes him right in that moment. Well, everything happens just like he says. 7 years, they got all kind of grain and food and Krispy Kreme donuts and everything else coming in. It's going great for them. And Joseph's storing it all up. He's doing a really good job. He knows what he's doing. God's given him the wisdom. And then the famine comes just like God said. Tremendous, amazing. Here comes the famine. And guess who gets hungry? The brothers. The brothers who sold him into slavery way back when. Well, they're sitting at home and they're starting to get hungry, and they're hearing about all this food that's going on in Egypt. Egypt's got all kind of food. You can go down there and get it. Everybody's talking about it, and they don't know that the reason everybody's talking about it and the reason there's food down there is because it's that brother that they sold. They sent him over there. He's doing it. They don't even know any of this. Have no idea what's going on. And so what happens is they finally come, and through a series of events, it's very, very emotional. You have to read it for yourself. I highly recommend it this afternoon. Get you some sweet tea, sit on the back porch, whatever you got to do, and read the story of Joseph from beginning to end. It's fabulous. And you feel the emotion when he reveals himself to his brothers. Because he's 39 years old. It's been 22 years. He was 17 when he left, and here he is in front of them. He reveals himself, and there's a lot of tears. And there's a lot of hugging, and there's a lot of embracing, and there's a lot of just overwhelming emotion in what he does here. And here's what he essentially says to them: you sold me into slavery. I've been promoted to the vice president, and here I am saving your life. You tried to kill me, and then I'm standing in front of you and tried to save your life. Does that sound natural to you? Does that sound like a normal human response to the way people treat us? You tried to kill me, and here I am standing here trying to save you. Because he'd been 17 years old, all this time had passed, 22 years have gone, they are stunned. And here's the thing, in trying to get rid of the dreamer, they tried to get rid of the dreamer, and in trying to get rid of the dreamer, they actually fulfill the dreams. It's incredible. Because here's the thing. You cannot resist God's ultimate purposes. That's the truth. And you hear, oh, God's going to do it this way, and you try to change that or do something else. I mean, that's the Bible is full of these stories of different nations and leaders trying to thwart God's plan. Oh, there's a prophecy that says so-and-so. Oh, well, I'm going to change that. And in order to change it, they actually fulfill exactly what God's going to do. And that's still happening today, that you cannot resist God's ultimate purposes. He is at work. It's going to happen the way he said it. Genesis 45:5, Joseph says to his brothers, and they're very afraid of him at this point. He's in this position of power. And I think that the reason, I'm getting ready to read this to you, the reason that I think that they're really scared is because if they were Joseph, they would kill themselves. Like if I were you, Joseph, and I know what I did to you and I was right there, I would kill me. That's why they're scared. But Joseph, again, he's not a normal human being because he's following the God, and his faithfulness to God is steadfast, and he does things that are not natural to human beings. And here's what he says. Do not be distressed or angry with yourself because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. God sent me here for you. He sees that. And he sends Joseph to Egypt in order to save the very ones who were trying to kill him. Let's just pause for a minute and say, how awesome is our God? That he loves like that he has compassion and mercy and grace in that way? To forgive these guys, to do even more than that, to send someone ahead of them to save them. And he does that for us. And it's God sending the Savior in order to give home to the murderers. And then now even Joseph understands it. He starts to get it. He said, now I see it, you're here. He sent me in order to take care of you. And God also, God also sends the famine. It's not just that he sent Joseph, he also sends the famine. In Psalm 105, verse 16 to 17, it says this, when he summoned a famine on the land. Side note, this is in Psalms. This story about Joseph is told everywhere then, because they're still talking about it. This is all passed down through all the generations. Everybody knows about Joseph and how he responded to the brothers and how he took care of his family when he didn't have to or shouldn't have, and how God sent him to save the brothers. And then it says this, when he summoned, it's talking about God, he summoned a famine on the land and broke all supply of bread. He sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. Not only was God ruling the actions of these brothers to get Joseph to Egypt, he's ruling the famine as well. God is in control of all of it. That's what they're saying. Because here's the thing. The world is not responding, and I don't just mean people, I mean the whole of creation is not responding at any time in history outside of the plan of God. There is never a moment in time, not just people, famines, viruses, everything else that's going on in the world where God is not in control. He is. He always has been. He always will be. And right now, God is working things for our good, and they're working for his glory. And Joseph finally sees it, and he understands it all, and it's coming to fruition, and his brothers are standing there. He says, oh, now I know. Now I get it. I look at the past, I see where my life has been, and you're standing here now, and I know why I'm here. Because he didn't realize that, I don't think, when they threw him into the pit, or when he was sold in slavery, or when he was lied about, or when they threw him in prison, or when he was left in prison he was forgotten about. Because we can't see it either. But because we can't see it and what God's doing in our life, it doesn't mean it's not true, or it's not happening, or that he's not in control. Because we can't see it. We don't know the future. Only God knows what's going to happen in the future. But what we do is we trust him now and for what's coming because of his faithfulness in the past. We've seen what he's done in the past. We understand where we've been and how he's taken care of us. And we see stories like this. Look what he did in the life of Joseph. And I'm now going to trust him for the future that I know to be unsure for me. I have no idea what's going to happen in America this week. And at this point, I mean, hey, it could be anything. But what I know is that he knows that it's going to happen. And not that he knows it's happened. It's actually part of his plan for it all to happen. He's controlling it. And he means it for our good. Now, we don't see it, but we need to believe in it. So what you have to do is you have to put out of your mind that it's an accident, and all of this is just happening on its own, or somehow by Satan, or somehow some act of nature that's what's happening here. It was uncontrollable. It's just a famine. Nobody knew. He knew. He sent it. He didn't look into the future. He doesn't look into the future. God doesn't, and say, oh man, Satan is bringing a famine, and my people will be in danger, and I will devise a plan in order to rescue them from the evil plot of my nemesis Satan. He doesn't do that. That's wrong. Here's what it says. When he summoned a famine on the land and he broke all supply of bread, he sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold into slavery. God brought the famine. He planned to bring his people to Egypt this way. There's a bigger plan coming here. And God sent Joseph, because what's going to happen is a few thousand years are coming, and the Savior to the world is coming through this line of people. And then there's no way they're going to die of a famine in Egypt. It's a promise that he made. And now the father of Jacob is dead. Let's fast forward many years. A lot of stuff happens. Again, you need to read this story. It's fabulous. And he gets to the end, and Jacob dies. That's his father. He brings them all to Egypt, where the food is. He talks to Pharaoh into giving them land. It's a tremendous story of God's faithfulness to them, and it's also an amazing story of their unfaithfulness, what happens in the next few years to God. But they fear Joseph, the brothers, because they think he's going to bring vengeance. They still can't understand how he's forgiving them, taking care of them, because of this supernatural way that he's responding to them. And so what they do is they come to him, very fearful. They think maybe Joseph just treated us like this so he could see his dad. Now dad's dead. He's going to give up on that thing, and he's just going to kill all of us. So they come to him, and here's what he says in verse 19 of chapter 50. Joseph says, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God?" That's a powerful statement. What humility that is. I mean, as powerful of a person he is in Egypt, and he looked at his brothers and says, you don't have to fear me. I'm not going to judge you in this moment, because if I did that, that means that I'm God, and I'm not, and I'm going to let him take care of you. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Clearly, look around you. Here's the thing. What man designed for evil, God designed for good. That's always the case. What man designed for evil, God designed for good. So, good. Because there's this prophecy that says, when he talked to Abraham way back and he started this covenant with him, the first thing he told Abraham is, I'm going to send your people into slavery for 400 years. That's a terrible way to start a covenant, isn't it? And so this is how he does it. The prophecy that Israel would spend 400 years in Egypt is being fulfilled by this miraculous sin of these brothers, and they mean it for evil, but God means it for good. But what we can't do in this is write in here what it does not say, okay? It does not say that the brothers meant it for evil, but then God used it for good. That's not what it says. That's totally different meaning. Because if you say that you had a meaning in the sin, and that God then turned it, then it means that God's chasing you around trying to fix problems that he didn't know about. And that's not what he says. He said, you meant something for this. You meant evil, and God had a meaning in it. He knew it was going to happen. He actually designed it. Because you had a meaning, and the meaning that you had was to kill the dreamer, and God had a meaning, and the meaning is to save the killers. That's what God wants. So you cannot rob God of his precious intentionality. And it's called love. Love. God did not use what the brothers did for good. He didn't take what they did and then made it good. It doesn't say that. It says that he meant to do it this way. This is the way God meant to do it. And he means to do it now, because what men mean for evil, God means for good. Here's the other thing, is salvation comes through our sin and our suffering. And we see this pattern over and over and over in the Bible. Namely, that God's saving victory for his people come through sin and suffering. It's over and over, and it's a pattern. And it's a pattern for them so that when the pattern, Jesus, comes, they recognize it and they see. And they start to understand. A lot of people were surprised. Why did Jesus go through all this suffering? But they really shouldn't have been, reading all of these stories, because over and over and over we see it in the Old Testament, and here it is again with Jesus. He's betrayed by his family. He was lied about. He's thrown in jail. He's innocent. And God sends him to save the very people who were trying to kill him. Amazing. And Joseph stands out in the story because of his amazing consistency and faithfulness in every relationship. He's faithful to Potiphar. He's faithful to the jailer. He's faithful to Pharaoh. He's faithful to the Lord all the way through. Verse 22 of chapter 39, the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. And what was his reward? Well, he was forgotten for another few years, a couple years by the cupbearer. And when Jesus came into the world to suffer, to ultimately die, he was perfectly righteous in every way, just like Joseph. Joseph was thrown into all this. He had no reason for this to happen to him, and same thing with Jesus. In the short run, Joseph is totally not rewarded. In the short run, Jesus, it doesn't seem like he's rewarded. Jesus is spit on, he's beat on, he's slapped, and there's your righteousness for you, Jesus. Live your life perfectly, and that's the way human beings treat you. And that's what happens to Joseph. He's righteous all the way through this, following the Lord, and look what happens to him. In the short run, it looks like it's not a good deal for him, and in the end, he ends become the prince of Egypt, the vice president of the country. And the same thing for Jesus. In the short run, it doesn't look like it's much. And in the long run, every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. And that's what we have to remember now, is where we are. We being faithful to God where we are right now. Trusting him for what's going to happen in the future. And in the short run, it might not look good, but we know that God is faithful to us in the end. And so we're called to look at this story of Joseph and respond in the same way, to use Jesus as our example. The story of Joseph is a model of the story with Jesus. You cannot separate Jesus from any story in the Bible, but this one is just so blatant. He is sold into slavery by his family, betrayed by his family, all of these things, innocent all the way through, and in the very end, he's standing at the right hand of the king. And he's looking, saying, these guys are with me. They're my family. And Pharaoh and the king says, bring them in. They're welcome into my place. But God says, bring my family in forever. It's amazing. And what we're scared of is because we don't know what to do with what's going on. Because we are scared that somehow God's not in control of everything. And this story shows you he is. He's in control. The problem is that we're trusting in ourselves, or we're trusting in other people. And we put our faith in us, and we put our faith in people, then we need to be scared instead of putting our faith in the Lord. Because if we believe that the answer to our salvation lies in a man or a woman somehow, then we have a whole lot to fear. But if we follow Jesus, then we know this to be true, and this comes from the book of Acts 22. We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of heaven. That's like the first thing that Luke told them, early Christians. One of the first things that he said to them was, you're going to go through many hardships in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. That's true. And we can all raise our hands and say, yeah, I understand that. I get it. We're seeing that. We are that. Because your current situation is not a problem for God. It's not a surprise to him. He's in control. He's working it for your good and for your glory. We're not alone. He understands. He's been there. And the reason that he went there and did all the suffering, because he loves all of you so much. And he stands at the right hand of the king, and he's been appointed by the king. And when Jesus sees us, he says, they're with me. Let them come in. And the king gives us a place to stay forever. And we watch how the world is responding. More and more, it just feels like we're aliens, like he talks about. That we're not meant for this place. It's not what it's supposed to look like. And we keep our eyes on eternity. That's the only way we make it through it. We keep our gaze on Christ. How do we do it? Let me end with this. How do we do it? I hear what you're saying. I see what Joseph's doing. I mean, so what? How do I do it? Well, the first thing is we got to surrender our life to Christ. We have to give everything over to him. Surrender everything about us to him. And then he tells us what to do. And there's two things. In fact, if you remember in the New Testament, the Pharisees got all around and they said, what are the two biggest commandments? They said, one thing, actually, it said one thing, he gave them two. What's the one thing that God wants us to do? So in our world right now, what is the thing that we want to do? And Jesus gives us two answers. Here's what you are supposed to do. Top of the list, 1 and 2, here they are. You know it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. And likewise, love your brother as yourself. That's the two. Worship God and love your brother as yourself. Serve other people. That's what it looks like to follow Jesus. And here's the problem, is that we're losing in both of those battles in America. Are we not? We're not worshiping God to the fullness in spirit and truth, and we're not serving other people. We're not doing for other people. We're taking from other people. And we're advertising that, saying the answer is for me to take what you have. We continue to take, and the more we take that's not ours, the less we step in further away from God, further away from God. And the two things that we have to do for those of us in this room is say we follow Jesus Christ is that we worship him for who he is, and we serve and lay down our lives for other people. Because what it does is it shows what he's done for us, the forgiveness, the pain and the suffering that he's went through, the love that he showed. That's every time we do that, that's the gospel. That is the good news. I'm laying my life down for you. I want to do something for you. I want to serve you because what he's done for me, I want to show you. Because what I'm doing here is so unnatural. It's supernatural. It doesn't make sense. This is not the way the world responds. And the only way to respond is having been transformed by the love of Jesus in our lives. He is our only hope. And it was great this morning for Sue Ann's message to the kids, because that's the question. Are you building your house on the rock? Or are you building your house on the sand? So the question is this: whose side are you going to be on this morning? You're going to be on God's side. And where is your faith? Where is your trust? Who are you looking to? What are you listening to?